minute or two. Folks are still logging in, so welcome. So once again, for those of you who have just logged on, welcome. We'll start in about a minute or so. We're just giving folks a chance to connect. Also, if I could ask everybody to please mute your phones just so we don't have any background noise, we greatly appreciate it.
Have a workshop like this, and I don't think we talked about it here because
Okay, welcome everyone. If I could ask everybody to please mute your phones so that we don't have any background noise, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. We'll get started in about 1 minute. So good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're located, and welcome to SIETAR USA webinar on Dispelling Myths for Inclusion of American Muslims. My name is Julia Gaspar Bates. I am a board member on SIETAR USA, and I'm delighted to welcome Luby Ismail today as our presenter for this very important topic and a very timely topic as well. Luby has been in the field for many, many years. I'll let her introduce herself in a moment, and is an expert on Arab culture and the Muslim world, and tries to, as her talk is about, dispel myths on American Muslims and Muslims throughout the world. On a personal note, she's been a very good friend of mine for many years. I've had the opportunity to work with her, to experience her talks during keynote speeches and at conferences, and I'm delighted to welcome her today. So Luby, we'll turn it over to you. Also, if I can just remind, if I can just remind everybody, for those of you who have just come on, please make sure that your microphone is muted. Also, we'll have questions at the end. So if you do have questions, feel free to type them into the chat box, and we'll also have about 20 minutes for Q&A at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you to SIETAR for this opportunity to be with you all today. Assalamu alaikum. Greetings of peace to you. That is the universal Muslim greeting. Regardless of it being a Muslim in France, a Muslim in Nigeria, a Muslim in England, a Muslim in New Zealand, a Muslim in Honduras, and a Muslim right here in the United States or Canada. that is the greeting that Muslims, regardless, and I always say the way to just start to build a rapport, to convey respect, is to start with that greeting. Assalamu alaikum. I am absolutely grateful to speak to you all today. Julia, when she contacted me over a month ago and said that we want you to do a topic, I said, well, let's deal with dispelling the myths and the misperceptions for pluralism and inclusion of American Muslims. However, after the horrific acts of massacre of Muslims while they are in their place of worship, I said, I need to change my presentation, that I can't be just looking at a Islam 101. So I need you first to know that I'm not a spokesperson for 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. And what I'm sharing with you is my perspective based on my own research as an interculturalist, as an American Muslim, and that I hope the most important thing is to give you some tools to take with you, because I cannot cover everything, but you will be able to have some of the most credible resources. And I'm very much want you to know that I'm accessible beyond today. So with that, I wanted to first really look at the victims. These are some of the faces of victims that were in New Zealand in those two mosques. As young, if you look to over to the bottom left, this little boy who was with his mother praying, who was only five or 4 years old. And it's been incredibly wrenching, but at the same time, I am most moved and touched by the outpouring that we have seen in New Zealand to the Muslim community, but also from around the world. And therefore, I think, putting a face behind Islamophobia, behind the bigotry, behind the anti-Muslim bias, I think that's why you're all here, is to not just learn about Islam, but how can we and you be allies to be more inclusive and to, as I say, live by the motto, e pluribus unum, out of many one. So with that, let me, I do hear maybe one person may have not muted. So just to make sure that you're muted on. Here's my objectives. I'm going to give you some awareness of the facts about Islam and Muslims. You all are very diverse. I know some of you may be scholars or professors or teachers, and so it may be basic 101, just to provide you, to make sure that we're all on the same foundation of understanding. Educate for literacy, and then really what can you do and what can you take? There are so many resources, and everything I'm going to give you, it won't cost $1. It won't cost anything to you, and these are extremely powerful and have been tested, and some of the things that I've been using. One of the things that I can tell you, it was after the heinous attacks of September 11th that I was catapulted into training law enforcement officers and community leaders, because out of that collective crisis was this collective test. How could we remain a united we the people? So I'm going to give you also some of those tools that I have. All right. This first section is to develop literacy. And let's look at what that really means. I want, though, first to play this for you. It's an initiative that we started called My Fellow Americans. It's a minute, it's no more than a minute and a half.
We have a problem in this country. It's called Muslims. We know our current president is one. You know he's not even an American. We need this question. We have training camps growing. They want to kill us.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
They have no interest in integration, no interest in assimilation. All they want to do is Islamize and transform the society that they're coming to.
I would not advocate that we put a Muslim in charge of this nation. I absolutely would not.
These people only believe in jihad. They don't want our system and have no sense of reason or respect for human life. They have no respect for human life.
Make no bones about it. That is pure, unadulterated evil.
And Americans need to wake up. I can't begin to tell you how important it is that we understand the true nature of Islam, that we see it for what it really is.
Students are teasing Muslim kids about their names and calling them terrorists. Some Muslim kids are trying to conceal their religious beliefs to avoid getting bullied.
There were more attacks on U.S. mosques in 2015 than there had been in the previous 5 years.
A Sikh shop owner in Michigan was shot in the face and accused the man of being part of ISIS.
Is this what we want for our communities? Is this who we are as Americans?
Police say the 17-year-olds broke several windows with an iron rod and slashed tires on a van. According to the report, Gonzalez Baca told police that, quote, all Muslims were terrorists.
Let's see here. Hold on a moment. Pretty powerful, yes. I know that took a lot for me to watch more than once. Let me just get back to the presentation here. Oops. Okay, so that we developed really to allow you to know that we wanted to show the American face of Muslims and also to see the impact of the political rhetoric that has really stirred and even made a greater attacks on Muslims and hate crimes. So let's look at some of this. And by the way, you can always get this from myfellowamericans.us. So what is Islamophobia? This is a definition from Georgetown University, and it's a fear and antipathy towards Muslims and Islam that has been really used to manifest and continue to have hate crimes as well as military attacks. And where did it come from? Where did it begin? And I've always said that we need to know history. And this has really been something since the Middle Ages, the Crusades. And there was this sense of conquering. And if any of you know that Spain was ruled by Muslims for 700 years, and then we have the forced conversion or killings of Jews and Muslims. And Muslims have been depicted as being uncivilized, violent, and what has led to knowing our history is that Europeans, nations have colonized, dominated Muslim majority countries. Edward Said, who is an author, an American, he spoke about how Orientalism has continued also to perpetuate this negative stereotyping. Now, in preparation for today, I learned that in 1997, how Islamophobia became popularized was by this very group that its main mission is to perpetuate racism and ethnic prejudice. So I want to ask you, and you can share in the chat, true or false, does unfavorable attitudes towards American Muslims, does it affect just American Muslims, or does it affect all of us? What do y'all say? And by the way, if you haven't picked up, I grew up in a small southern town in the United States. So I've held on to my y'alls. I hope you don't mind. I believe we have some people here from Georgia. Yes, yes, Corinne, I see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all of us, yes, we're all affected. So let's look at this. This is just citing specifically about Muslims. And this has been and something that all of us can get numbers from is the FBI report on hate crimes. And what we've seen is from 2001, when there was a surge of attacks on Muslims and on those perceived to be, that we have found in the last year, they have also risen. But what and which group gets impacted most by Islamophobia? What and which group gets affected by Islamophobia, even though I've moved to this next slide? Who else gets affected? When we say entire community, the hate crimes, if you look at that report, it's anti-Semitic Semitism, that the Jewish community is really, and as we know more recently with the horrific killings at the house of worship in Tree of Life Synagogue. So I've talked just before this call to a very prestigious Islamic calligrapher, and he said, you know, really where the anti-Muslim and Islamophobia is rooted to anti-Semitism that has a long-standing, unfortunate history in Europe. Okay, so look at this. We continue to look at just the statistics and the reportings. And as one police officer told me, that of all the reports that we receive, that only 1 out of every 10 is ever submitted, even though we've been trying to educate Muslims, particularly, to not feel fearful to report. And what we've seen is with the increased hate, there's less safety, there's assaults, verbal and physical. Many mosques have been, their property has been attempts at gunshots, arson, vandalism. I mean, ugly things where people have left strips of bacon and pork on the doorsteps, of course, spray painted across, but it has been our places of worship since 2001. And again, a rise in these anti-Muslim attacks at our houses of worship. Bullying, our children have more and more felt, not only has it been from their peers, but it's also been from staff within the schools, things that teachers and administrators have said to children. The one thing that we do know is that people who are identifiably Muslim are much more targeted. And so women who cover their hair and wear hijab, they also have a higher rate of being bullied. And as one woman said, you know, people used to look, but after 9/11, and now with the travel ban or the Muslim ban, that people look and they keep looking. And it can be subtle, but it can be very painful because I feel quite intimidated and fearful. This is one of, and by the way, I'm going to provide you after this, you're going to get a printout, or we'll send to you a PDF of resources. And this organization, which I got their permission to use, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, and they and others have reported that over $200 million by over 30 groups, this is their specific way that they are trying to perpetuate and trying to very much make Americans and make society feel that Islam is a religion that doesn't belong here, and that Muslims are here to not be embracing of American values. One of the hardest thing has been some of these groups actually got where they put on city buses anti-Muslim statements and advertisement. Media coverage. I was shocked by this, that 80% of the coverage of Islam and Muslims is negative in the press compared to North Korea. So here you've got, again, Islam and Muslims and over 1 billion people and the faith that they may adhere to. Now, this is the New York Times was portraying, based on looking at media coverage, more negatively than cancer and cocaine. So it's interwoven into the air that we're breathing, in a sense, conscious or unconscious. So yes, it impacts all of us. This hostile social climate leads to discrimination, harassment, fear, and insecurity. And we've always said that when there is, because of my training with law enforcement, they have said, you know, crime goes up, that makes it harder on all of us. And so I've been very, very grateful to see, even I went to the mosque on Friday, and to see that there was not only presence of law enforcement, but also other people of other faiths who said, we want to make sure that you feel safe and that we're here to stand with you. So remember this. I mean, the Gallup poll by Delia Mogahed has shown that American Muslims are just as patriotic, that we have explicitly condemned and rejected extremism, and that being an American like myself and being a Muslim is not contrary or conflicting to one another. Please also, I want you to know, submit any questions that you have so that we can, if I can answer them, I will, but I appreciate if you feel at ease to ask anything as I'm speaking. All right. So developing your awareness creates mutual respect and trust and facilitating safety and peace. That has been critical. I think a lot of people now are saying, help us understand, but more now I hear, as you are on this call and this webinar, is what can we do? So the first thing is, let's educate for understanding. And this is going to be just, forgive me, because I don't know the level of awareness, knowledge. I know some of you are Muslim and you probably could present this yourselves, but I'm just going to give an overview as best as I can. So, true or false? I want you all to tell me in your chat. Islam promotes violence. These are Muslims are perpetuators of terrorism. Islam is inherently anti-Christian. That Muslims want to establish Sharia law in the United States. So what do you say to all of these statements? And these are just four of the things that I know I hear, and that Muslims. Yes. Mariana says all false. Brett, none of them, I know. These are some of the presumptions and assumptions that people have. I know, and I could have probably at least 20 of the myths and misperceptions, but I wanted to focus on these four, okay? Yes, and Brett, you're right. We hear this all the time. So let's look at the first one. First, just that Islam promotes violence. It's been just to know that the word Islam and Muslim, the root is silams, sin, lam, mim in Arabic, which actually means peace. And as a Muslim, it is one who submits to the will of God to attain peace. So to have our religion so presumed to be violent, which I want to look at, where does that come from, and that misperception. So, and then when I greeted you and said, Assalamu alaikum, may peace be with you. So first, false. Muslims are perpetrators of terrorism. That unfortunately, and it's because of the media coverage and because the presence of Americans, and particularly, and I'm speaking, forgive me, I know that we have some Canadians and we have maybe a couple of people from Europe, but I am coming from a USA perspective, and I think though some of this can apply also in your countries. That Muslims are actually not the perpetrators or perpetuators of terrorism, but the most victims of terrorism, of violent acts. And think about this when you know that in Iraq, in Afghanistan, that you can find right now, if you're aware, what happened in Burma and the Muslims that had to flee for their lives to Bangladesh, that you know in India, there are many attacks, unfortunately, at Muslims by a extremist Hindu group. What about the Uyghur Muslims in China, where in China there are over 50 million Muslims. And so Muslims are the greatest victims. And I've said, you know, when there is a bombing, when there is attacks, that those criminals, they're not saying, let me distinguish where I kill and where I bomb, that the greatest victims actually are Muslims. This is actually a picture out of Turkey. And you can see the coffins are covered and the men that are there to pray over them and their bodies at their funeral. So over and over again, that Muslims are the victims, sadly. I tried to get numbers of how many, but I felt there's such a range that I didn't feel at ease to give you a specific one, but it's something that you can look into. All right. So reminding ourselves that extremists are the minority, and they exist in every, sadly, religious group, be it Jewish. Look at what happened in Burma. You know, this has been Buddhist attacks on the Muslims, and also we have in the United States that I know that most of you would not think that the attacks, this picture of these Klansmen, that is not American. And yet this extremist fringe can be seen as a part of America, but they are a minority. But if you do not know others, for example, of course, after the attacks of 9/11, that bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and ISIS today, that these are not the majority of Muslims. I mean, think about it, over 1 billion Muslims in the world. But sadly, when one is violent and causes killings and destructions, that this gets painted as the religion, Islam. So false, again, you're all right. And by the way, everybody's going to get a prize. Anybody who's been to my trainings, you get a prize after this. So Islam is inherently anti-Christian. One, Islam believes in one God, that there are the messengers of God. The first prophet messenger for Muslims is Adam, Eve, Abraham, Mary, Moses, Jesus. Jesus is mentioned more times in the Quran than any other prophet. Scriptures we hold as holy books, and scriptures to revere is the Torah, the Bible, the Quran. That Muslims believe in the second coming of Christ, that we look and believe that there will be the final day of judgment and that Christ will return. So there is a sense of endearment and love, and a sense that we are, as Muslims say, people of the book, the Abrahamic faith. I don't know, before I go into this next, if there's any question in particular about this. I know I'm kind of skimming very, very fast, but I want to make sure if you have any specific questions on this. Okay, I'm going to give just a couple of seconds to see if anyone has. I wish I could see all of you, but you all see me. All right. Islam significantly, oh, I see a question here. Okay, who is Christ and how is he defined? Is it Jesus Christ? Yes. Okay, for Muslims, we believe in the virgin birth of Mary, and that Jesus was a messenger of God, a prophet of God. Now, here's the distinct difference, that Muslims actually believe that Jesus was not crucified, which I know is paramount for Christians. For Muslims, that Jesus actually was not crucified and he ascended to heaven, and that he would return on the day of judgment. So we don't believe in the Trinity of Jesus, but we look at Jesus, like I said, as a messenger. Actually, as a Muslim, every time I say any messenger's name, including Jesus, I would say, and may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. And so, yes, it's the same, but I know I grew up with evangelical Christians, and they, my best friends in the South, and we would have this discussion, and of course they felt, but you have to accept him as God, as the Son of God and the Holy Spirit. And I said, well, I love Jesus, and but that's where we would differ. Okay. But it is the second coming of Christ that we do believe, and that he is the only prophet who was saved and not killed or died on earth, and that he will return. Okay, Islam significantly differs from Judaism and Christianity. True or false? What do y'all say? I'm waiting. Yes. Debbie, Taniza, depends on the definition significantly. Yes, that's true. Karina. Okay, let's look at this. That Islam, hold on one moment. So, I mean, yes, there are differences, but I want to remind people to know that Muslims are mega monotheist, that we believe in one God, that we believe that there was the revelations before the Quran, and that the Quran is just a continuation or a reminder of those stories and those prophets' messages. That we revere, like I said, the Torah and the Gospels. I know that charity is important in Islam. We say zakat, and that the pilgrimage to Mecca. That is, of course, different. For Muslims, Mecca is where the first house of worship was built, or the first stone was laid by Abraham. So there is much that we share, and that's one of the things for me, again, as an American Muslim who had no masjid or no mosque where we lived, no other Muslims. And so my connection was with evangelical Christians, and that we could come together based on our shared love of God, that we could come together based on our values, and that we could come to a place of looking at mutual respect for one another. What are the pillars, or I say the practices? I mean, think about this, that as Muslims, we say to be able to achieve peace, as you may have a workout physical regime, this is your life regime. And that if you pray and have remembrance to be grateful to God, to be able to stay, as we say, on the straight path, fasting during the month of Ramadan is one that is to remind ourselves of the simple blessings that we have of food and water, and also to be able to know what it's like and to feel the hunger that those who do not have or have very little. Then charity, zakat, and the pilgrimage, as I mentioned. Prayer can happen anywhere. It can happen in parks. It can happen in offices and schools. I know some of you are in universities, and there's probably a place where Friday prayer can occur. I mean, right here in the United States, in the U.S. Capitol, there is a place where Muslims can gather to do the communal prayer. Yes, there are male and female spaces. It doesn't have to do with one is more unequal to the other. It's out of modesty. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. There's a significant Jewish population. And I know that there are some synagogues that have different spaces or ways that women and men may worship if they're more conservative. And it's the same with mosque, that there can be spaces with a barrier or a curtain. Some of them can be women in the balcony. But that's another misperception about Muslims is that women do not have the same rights as men, and I'll get to that in a moment. I have somebody saying, did evangelical friends really accept that of you? I can say, yes, they did. I mean, did they still believe that I must be Christian to attain heaven? And yes, and at the same time, because they got to know me and got to know my family, that they were able to recognize, and maybe we had to have a dialogue and discussion that was difficult, but in the end that there was mutual love and respect for one another. I'll talk more if people want afterwards about my own experiences. The Quran, Muslims believe that it is God's words, that Muhammad received it in the year 610, and literally Quran means recitations, and that Muslims hold the Quran as the literal word of God through the angel Gabriel that they received, that Muhammad received it. It is different than the Bible. It actually works that, except for the first verse in the Quran, that it is the longest surah or verse to the shortest. And I have people with good intentions. Some of you may have tried to say, oh, I want to read the Quran. It's a hard book for me as a Muslim to read it. And so to know if you want to read it, I always recommend that you start from the end, which is the shorter and more spiritual ones. I can also maybe provide the Quran that have been translated into English that I believe are more accurate and correct. The very first verse in the Quran is called the Fatiha, the opening. And that verse is so close. I'll say it to you in English right now. In the name of God, the merciful and the compassionate. Glory be to God, Lord of the worlds, King of the day of judgment. You alone I worship, and you alone I will pray to. Please lead me on the straight path, the path that you have blessed, and not the path of those who go astray. Ameen or Amen. I mean, it's most connected and shared in the message as in the Lord's Prayer. Jews and Christians and others are revered or known as people of the book, that we all come from the same source and the teachings from Adam to Abraham to the others mentioned. Okay. I know I've covered a lot there, but in the interest of time. So do Muslims want to establish Sharia law in the US? Because we have over 25 states in the United States that have spent their very precious time to have anti-Sharia laws, that anti-Sharia proclamations. This myth that we're here to enforce Sharia law. So what is Sharia law? I can tell you that the only time I, as an American Muslim, knew or heard about Sharia law was when I married my husband. And the Imam told him that under Sharia, that he cannot touch my wealth. Not that I'm so wealthy, but that what I owned was mine, was my property, and that he could not have any of it if in marriage, but also in divorce. That's how I personally knew about Sharia. But because of this presentation and others, I've had myself to really learn about what is Sharia. So here, very simply, divine ideal for moral behavior. It's a guide for marriage, for prayer, for inheritance, for divorce. I mean, it is something also that is a guide, but also based on the Quran and the teachings of the Quran. It's similar to Jewish law or to the canon law, and that for us as American Muslims, we under Sharia must be loyal and uphold the law of the land. I remember receiving a question from an American Muslim soldier, and he was deployed to Iraq, and he felt, am I conflicted? Here I am serving as a member of the U.S. Army, the military, and I'm in Iraq, and I'm engaging in a war, and in the end, where my loyalties are to what, and what is expected of me. And it was an imam who actually responded, because I didn't know what to say. And Imam Majid from a mosque here in Virginia had said, no, you are, based on your nationality, you are to serve and protect the country in which you belong. And look, in the United States, the Constitution cannot be overthrown, ever. And so this is one of the things really important to know, that under Sharia, it is really how I and all the Muslims live and follow their faith. Okay. Muslims, are they easily identified by the way they look and they dress? True or false? I'm making this quite easy for you all. Yeah, I mean, can they easily? False, yes. So these are all American Muslims. There's a wonderful initiative by ISPU, and you can go, I'll have that resource to you all. But American Muslims are the most racially, ethnically, culturally diverse religious group. More than Christians, more than Jews, more than Hindus, more than Buddhists, that they are diverse. That this myth or misperception that they quote unquote look Muslim. What does it mean to look Muslim? This is all Muslim faces right here and Muslim people. So again, what's the breakout so that you can see is that you have 25% of American Muslims are actually Black or African American. And then you see here 24% are white. What does that mean, white? You know, Arabs can sometimes identify themselves as being white because whoever decided that Arabs are Caucasoid or Caucasian. But they can also find, for example, some of you may know that I have my husband, who I I love and I am grateful to him, but he is a white guy from Pennsylvania. And so he identifies as white, he's Muslim, and again, people wouldn't presume that he is. So we've got the most diverse in terms of race, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of national origin. And more with the growing Latino population in the United States, there are many Latinos who are Muslim. They may be converts, but I'm finding even my own stereotypes and assumptions that they are Muslim based on their, before they even came to this country. Okay. This actually is also from the ISPU. It is from the United States, someone has asked. And you can get this, all of this, from the resources that I'm going to give you. Okay, Muslim women. This is a common misperception about women. And one of the things that I need you to remember is that there are cultural traditions, cultural impositions that get blanketed as being Muslim. And I'm going to be frank. For example, female circumcision. This predates Islam. This has nothing to do with Islam. However, yes, as an Egyptian, I know that I have the older generation. It was presumed that this would be not only cultural, but it's Muslim. And so it's been a big campaign, I know in Egypt, to not continue FMG. And so this is not Islamic. And yet, yes, there may be some Muslims that would say it is. But I also want to deal with education. The first word of revelation to the Prophet Muhammad was read, and that education is paramount. And so when you have, like the Taliban, again, the fringe extremists, and remember, when we find the facts are that the media portrays much, 70% of the coverage of Muslims and Islam in the media is violent and terrorism and oppression, then it perpetuates that misperception and that bias that exists. As Muslim women, Muslim women rights, forcing or telling a woman, a girl, that she must marry without her acceptance. Again, this is a tradition, but it is un-Islamic, that a woman should know and accept who she is to marry. Unfortunately, it is painful to know and to see that this continues in some Muslim majority countries. Divorce. You know, I have family in Saudi Arabia. Most of my family is in Egypt. I have over 70 first cousins in Egypt. But I also have family in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia. And I'm amazed by how many of them have been married and divorced. And I'm not just talking my male cousins, but my female cousins. And when I say, wow, you're marrying and divorcing, it seems like more than that in America. And you know how they respond to me? They say, Hada is sunnah, Hada, it's acceptable. and it's something that is not against their faith, but accepted. Wealth, I mentioned to you that women, their wealth, their earnings, I always tease my husband. I say, what I make as president of Connecting Cultures is mine. But for my husband, I like to say, what is mine, but what is yours is ours. And thus, my husband and my brothers, they would get more inheritance. However, they are also financially responsible for their wife, for their children, for their parents, for their sisters, that the financial responsibility of the male is much more than the female. But I'm an American Muslim. I have two brothers. My parents have told me, you know what? We are going to equally distribute the inheritance to our children. So you must again remember, just like diversity of Christians and Jews and how they adhere or don't is going to vary based on the individual, based on their cultural upbringing, based on where they are in terms of how they lead. Okay. All right, moving right along. Muslims are recent arrivals to the United States of America. True or false? I'm going to keep moving on this. Of course, the answer is false. So the picture to the left is of Abdurrahman, and he was known as a prince, and the enslaved Africans were anywhere from 15 to 20%. Some of my readings have said that the basis of Islamophobia really is rooted in racism, because many of the Africans who were enslaved, captured and enslaved, like Abdurrahman, were Muslim, and some by basis of being in this country without any freedoms, they were not able to practice. But then some of those who were enslaved were actually seen to be the most literate of the enslaved Africans. Because why? They learned the Quran, that they were able to know and to read and to write in Arabic. And it's fascinating stories. I want you to know that there is a great documentaries that I will provide in the resources, and one is particularly of Abdurrahman. The woman to the right, she won the bronze medal in fencing. So Muslims, women are women who have been able to be in all types of industries, and I love Ibtihaj. She really is a fighter, an athlete, and she now is a real spokesperson for not just Muslim women, but for women in general. Okay, so section 2, my main thing is to remember that we share as Muslims in Islam, the Judaic-Christian foundation, diverse in our identities and practices. We've been a part of America's past, present, and future. So this is really, for me, most important to you all. And is, what do we do now? So we've talked about what is Islamophobia, how are American Muslims being impacted, but now what can we do? So, and in the meantime, I want you also to start perhaps submitting questions that I'm hoping to open up for us to answer. Are mosques the best place to meet Muslims? The answer, of course, is false. That you can know that actually what has been shown is maybe 15% of Muslims in the United States actually attend a mosque on a regular basis. Yes, it is the house of worship. Yes, it is. It's presumed as requirement for the men to go to the mosque on Fridays. But just like, we have Christmas or Easter only Christians, for Muslims, it could be the same. And yet, where are you going to meet Muslims? In professional associations, in sports. I mean, I can tell you these pictures actually are of the girl with the brown straight hair is my daughter Layla. And she plays basketball, she plays soccer, and when we go to the field, we are going to see many cultural and ethnic groups, but a lot of Muslims are there. Neighborhood events. I mean, Muslims want to be seen not just through the lens of national security, but that we are doing the same as others, that we want to work, we want to pay our taxes, we want to have good schools for our children. That's really the basis of our life. And yet people think, oh, all Muslims are only to be found in mosque. Also, you see all the girls here are covering their hair, hijab. It's a personal choice, and yet you'll find some yet very young, like these girls, this Girl Scout troop, they all are covering their hair. I actually want you all to, I'm not going to stop sharing, but one of the things that some of you know that I do in my trainings is to look at, and I did this particularly after 9/11, but if I were to pray, or if I am to enter a mosque, that I would do this. I would cover my hair. I'm having, and for you to think about how are you maybe perceiving if you saw me in public and what people assume about women who cover. Now, I know when I go up and out in public like this, sometimes people will make assumptions. They may assume I don't speak English, and then I get, you speak English good? And I love to respond, no, I speak English well. Or I get people say, oh, you speak so good. How did you learn English? I said, well, I learned it because I was born here. I think, again, if you don't have the familiarity to Muslims, and that's what we want you to be able, is to get people to engage and encounter, because what has been shown by polls is that the fear and the apprehension about Muslims are for those who do not know a Muslim. I'm looking here to see a question from Carrie. Here in Quebec, there is a belief amongst people who work as interculturalists that Muslim head wearing covering is a symbol of women's oppression. You know, the Prophet Muhammad, he was married his first wife, his most devoted and most of, he married Khadija. He worked for her number one. Number two, he was younger than her. She was an older, established businesswoman. And number three, she asked him to marry. And so, again, in just that model, think about this. This scarf doesn't come just out of an Islamic perspective. It comes what? Out of a Judaic-Christian understanding of modesty. Think about if you see Orthodox Jews, that they cover their hair or they wear a wig. I know in Israel, when I was there, I saw the Orthodox Jews and how they dressed and even how they lived. I know that Christians, some of the Orthodox churches, and some of you may be Catholic and you remember your mother or your grandmother who covered her hair. I mean, think about Mary, mother of Jesus. Do you ever see a statue or a picture of her without the scarf? So again, being aware of what might be your unconscious bias of those labels that are presumed. And I can say, yes, is there oppression? No question. And is it, again, when we hear about Afghanistan and what women by the Taliban were told that they couldn't do and don't, can't work, that they can't be free. But that's, again, over 50 majority Muslim countries. And when the media focuses on the hair cover, and Muslim women say, see me beyond this piece of cloth on my head. I'm impressed by Muslim women here in the United States who say that more than focusing on what's on my head, why don't you focus what's in my head? I mean, what a statement of liberation, of feminism, and therefore to think about and know what might be those automatic tapes that continue. All right, I'm seeing the time is moving on us, so I want just what are the things that you can do? Ask, empathize, and listen. These are pictures out in New Zealand. I have been so moved by the Prime Minister and by the community. I mean, this picture of this biker and this gang of bikers that said, we are going to come to protect the mosque. There has been an outpouring and a model of a leader, a woman that has shown that she can stand and lead and show how her nation responds to the hate-filled act that occurred there. I have listened to her over and over again, honestly. It has been a sense of relief for me, and seeing a leader to go and even to really convey compassion and make changes in her own nation by modeling it. So what can you do? Engage in the diversity for counter narratives. Please, we need you to show the various faces and stories of Muslims and interfaith events that are happening. I want you to know right now that regular encounters must continue. It's not enough to just do something in reaction to. How are we meeting and connecting on a regular basis with one another to have the difficult discussions and the dialogues to come together? meeting with more conservative communities. I'm going to be honest that yes, the evangelical community has been more, perhaps we found, I'm generalizing and I don't want to say all, but there definitely have been found what we need to do is address the more conservative evangelical communities. But what we're doing now, we just had a dialogue and discussion with evangelical leaders because we've got to start at the top. Join campaigns to advertisers that there's been now more and more saying, okay, this is what we're seeing in the anti-Muslim depictions. We're going to go to the money. We're going to go to the advertisers. Some other things, I'm just going to put this up for you because I want to open it now for questions. You will have all of this, and this is the Council on American Islamic Relations. And I would not have included this before, but I am now, is to say to you that let's hold our elected officials accountable. Add your voice to oppose anti-Muslim campaigns. Email, write, the media voicing your opinions. Support efforts. And Islamophobia is connected to xenophobia. It's connected to racism. It's connected to anti-Semitism. This is not just one community. It's all communities. Also check in and find out about your local law enforcement. Have they done training about engaging with Muslims? And know what they are, because we have found, I know my work, that they would maybe have a Islamophobe as so-called an expert training our law enforcement. And when we have put a deliberate campaign to remove somebody who is not going to give a fair depiction of Muslims, an honest one, an expert. I mean, we are not here to convert. We are only looking to teach. So this is, I'm not going to read this. You're going to have all this. This is something that actually has been provided, the 7 steps of cultural competent engagement. It was specific to law enforcement, but I think that it's very relevant to us here. And lastly, these resources I want you to know about. I didn't have the time, but I wanted to show you and let you know we have American Muslims, Facts Not versus Fiction. Show this in your classes. Show this at your workplace. Show this in your university. It's just taking some of the assumptions and misperceptions of Muslims. It's about 8 minutes long, and it's has over 1 million views, and it's something even you can see on our Facebook page. This initiative also with UPF, which I have to give full disclosure, is my husband's company, Unity Productions Foundation, that you can all get copies of all their films on Muslims and Islam. The most recent film is called Sultan and the Saint, which is the true story of Saint Francis of Assisi, engaged during the Crusades when the Crusaders were perishing in Egypt. Sultan came and saved them to lead to this powerful engagement. All right, I need to stop. I want to open it up for Q&A.
So Luby, thank you so much. This was an incredibly informative and helpful webinar, I think, for all of us who are working in this realm. We have a couple of questions have come, a few questions that have come in, a couple of which Luby has already responded to. So I'm just going to go through these and then invite people to either type questions in the chat room, or if you'd like to unmute your phone, you can do that as well. Shelley asked if you could just address how a newscaster was recently fired for saying that a congresswoman has allegiance to Sharia law because she wears a hijab, and just wondering what your comments are on that.
I don't know about it. I'm not familiar with it, but she was fired. Are we able to unmute Shelley? I'm not familiar with it, Shelley. I'd have to say. I mean, there's definitely been.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. Okay, let's see. How about this? Shelley, we can talk about it offline. If we can't get to you, what other questions might there be?
I realize I'm unmuted, but can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm so sorry. I have mutes on both sides.
Okay.
So please, someone else on the group help me out here, but it was a commentator, and it became bigger news because our president wanted her reinstated. But she and I believe she's with Fox, and we don't need to spend time on it, but it was just that when you were talking about Sharia law and the connections that people make and the assumptions that people make, and then the conservative subtext is that if you're wearing a hijab, then your allegiance is not to the United States.
Oh, God. Well, you know. And she was fired?
Yes, but I'll find that for you and send it to you. But my bigger question, Luby, and I apologize, I don't want to dominate, but since Christchurch, I've seen so much more reporting on how the white power movement, and you've already addressed this, but I want to know if you've seen this before, but they were linking the violence in Black churches and in Jewish synagogues and in Muslim mosques to this white power movement. And I had never seen that level of linkage or commentary before, and I'd love to hear
Yes. I mean, it is linked. I mean, when I said, does anti-Muslim bigotry and hate crimes affect all of us? I mean, yes. I mean, that there is no question a common link to all of this. The white nationalist movement, I mean, we can get their Islamophobic, but also then it's the anti-Black, it's also the anti-Jewish. I mean, so when you see a rise in this, you're going to see a rise in the other. So it is no question. I mean, I feel that perhaps Christchurch, sadly, like a 9/11, that is an awakening for people. But this is why I need you. We need each other. I don't want to see any more killings at any house of worship. And what I am loving to see now, I just read last night that the Tree of Life synagogue community has raised over $40,000 to donate to Christchurch, a Muslim community. And that's the best of us. And that, I think, as peacemakers and people who want to see unity and that we've got to be active in our communities, in our workplaces, and with our elected officials and leaders, that we must speak up and act up. We cannot just feel a sense of futility.
So Luby, we have another question that came in that is the structure of Islam with each imam being able to speak independently. Does it make it difficult for Americans since there's not one voice for or against actions? So if you could address that.
There has been, this is the other thing, we have had our Muslim leaders have, from 9/11 on, who have had a major proclamation and denouncement, say, of terrorism and extremism. There is a 800-page fatwa ruling against suicide bombings and extremism, but it doesn't make the media. It doesn't, and I'm gonna own it. If you haven't heard it, then we need to do better. And that's on us, but at the same time, think about, I've, even with law enforcement, with teachers, I've said, turn off the news. Let's listen to the olds. Let's listen to when communities and people like the one that I grew up in, for people to be able to connect and to talk and to see one another. But yes, I do believe, that this is not an isolation, that this is based on our changing demographics. And some have said, I just was speaking to someone at Georgetown, and they said the Obama effect, that with President Obama, as you know, it was Donald Trump who said, the birther, that the question was he really an American? So there is a sense of, because there was, quote unquote, a black man in the White House, that there was a reaction that has led to even more coming out of the outside of, look at what happened in Charlottesville. That's connected, as well. And what were they screaming? Jews will not replace us. So anti-Muslim, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism.
Luby, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing this really important topic with all of us. And thank you for all of you for joining the webinar. Just to sort of wrap up, once again, a couple of people asked, we will unfortunately not be sharing the slides for this. However, there will be an audio recording available for all of you, and it will be in the members only section of the website. We'll also send you some information, and apologies if you weren't able to view the video, but we will send you the link to watch the video that Luby shared as well. Luby has also generously agreed to answer any additional questions that come up, so feel free to send them to us and we'll field them to her and get them back to you. And also, on the previous slide, she also had a link to UPF Films, which is her husband's company. I can personally vouch that there are some amazing movies that can really, documentaries and others that they have created that really complements a lot of the information that Luby has provided today. So once again, thank you. We'll be having another webinar next month, so stay tuned. And again, thank you so much, Luby, for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you all. Salam alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Perfect.